The chipped paint on the windowsill felt rough beneath Jaylen's fingers. He traced the peeling edges, the rhythm a silent counterpoint to the melody unspooling in his head. Outside, the familiar cacophony of Stockton, the distant rumble of a truck, a dog barking 2 streets over, the faint strains of a neighbor's radio formed a backdrop to his solitary world. This small, cramped duplex, with its worn linoleum and second-hand furniture, held more than just his meager possessions. It held the echoes of every note he'd ever played, every emotion he'd poured into the keys. Jaylen's love for music didn't start with lessons or sheet music. It started with a cracked tablet propped precariously on a stack of library books, its tiny speaker blasting out old R&B songs his grandmother used to sing. He was 6, maybe 7, small enough to curl up beneath the window, mesmerized by the way the music seemed to seep into his bones, filling the quiet spaces with something vibrant and alive. He'd hum along, his small voice a hesitant echo, tracing the melodies with his fingers on the dusty floorboards. Later, when his grandmother passed, leaving a gaping hole in the fabric of his life, it was the music that became his solace, his confidant. He'd found a cheap keyboard at a garage sale, its keys yellowed and chipped, and taught himself to play, painstakingly replicating the melodies he heard on the tablet. Each note was a fragile thread, weaving together a tapestry of memory and emotion. He played at night, after finishing his homework and chores, the small room filling with a sound that was both achingly familiar and thrillingly new. The music was a language he understood, a way to express the feelings that words couldn't touch. The joy, the grief, the simmering frustration of a life lived on the margins all found voice in the melodies he coaxed from the worn keys. As he grew older, the music became more than an escape. It became a shield, a way to deflect the taunts and sneers of the kids at school who saw only his worn clothes and quiet demeanor. They didn't see the fire burning beneath the surface, the passion that ignited in his eyes when his fingers touched the keys. They couldn't hear the music that pulsed in his veins, a constant, insistent rhythm that drove him forward. He practiced relentlessly, pouring every spare moment into honing his craft. The library became his second home, its shelves filled with scores he couldn't afford to buy, their complex harmonies a challenge he relished. He devoured them, absorbing the intricacies of Bach and Beethoven, the raw emotion of Chopin and Debussy, each composer a new voice whispering secrets into his soul. His fingers, once clumsy and hesitant, gained strength and dexterity, dancing across the keys with an effortless grace that belied his years. Now, the worn keyboard sat in the corner, a silent witness to his journey. Tomorrow, he would be playing a Steinway, a grand piano that gleamed like polished ebony, its presence both intimidating and exhilarating. Mrs. Parker, his music teacher, had secured him a spot at the Riverstone Academy fundraiser, a chance to showcase his talent to a room full of people he'd only ever seen from afar. Riverstone Academy. The name itself evoked images of manicured lawns, pristine buildings, and students who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. It was a world away from his modest existence, a world he'd never dared to imagine himself a part of. The thought sent a shiver of apprehension down his spine. He closed his eyes, picturing the opulent hall, the rows of expectant faces. A knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. What was he doing there? A kid from Stockton, playing for the elite of Riverstone. They wouldn't understand. They wouldn't appreciate the music the way he did. They'd see only what he was an outsider, an anomaly in their perfectly ordered world. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture betraying his nervousness. He could still back out. Mrs. Parker wouldn't be happy, but it would be better than facing the inevitable humiliation. He imagined their whispers, their condescending smiles, the way they dissect his performance with their practiced eyes, searching for flaws, for reasons to dismiss him. But then, another image surfaced his grandmother's face, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she hummed along to his clumsy attempts at playing Amazing Grace on the old keyboard. He remembered the quiet pride in her voice when she told him he had a gift he needed to share with the world. The knot in his stomach loosened slightly. He wasn't just playing for them. He was playing for her, for the memory of her unwavering belief in him. He was playing for himself, for the music that pulsed through his very being, demanding to be heard. He took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs with a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. Tomorrow, he would face the music, and in doing so, he would finally face himself. The chipped paint on the windowsill felt cool beneath his fingertips now, a grounding presence in the swirling vortex of his thoughts. The melody in his head shifted, the hesitant notes giving way to a surge of quiet confidence, a premonition of the power that lay dormant within him, waiting to be unleashed. The opulent chandelier cast fractured rainbows across the polished gymnasium floor, a kaleidoscope of light that mocked the tremor in Jaylen's hands. Riverstone Academy. Even the air here felt expensive, thick with the perfume of privilege and the hushed whispers of money. He clutched his worn music folder tighter, the edges softened with years of use, a stark contrast to the gleaming surfaces surrounding him. He'd known it would be like this. Mrs. Parker had warned him, but knowing and experiencing were two vastly different things. He'd imagined grandeur, of course, but this was a different language of wealth, one he couldn't even begin to decipher. His threadbare jacket suddenly felt like a neon sign flashing his inadequacy. He swallowed, the lump in his throat stubbornly refusing to budge. The Steinway gleamed under the stage lights, a majestic beast of polished ebony and ivory. He'd only ever seen such instruments in pictures, dreamt of their touch, the resonance of their sound. He'd promised Mrs. Parker he wouldn't even go near it, just play the upright in the practice room. But the pull was magnetic, irresistible. He found himself drawn towards it, his fingers itching to feel the smooth keys, to coax music from its heart. A snicker sliced through the air, sharp as broken glass. Jaylen flinched, turning to see Brandon Fielding and his entourage, their faces masks of amusement. Brandon, with his perfectly styled hair and tailored suit, looked like he belonged on a magazine cover, not in a high school gymnasium. Jaylen, on the other hand, felt like an intruder, a stray note in a perfectly composed symphony. He knew Brandon, or rather, he knew a Brandon. Everyone did. The Fielding name was practically synonymous with Riverstone Academy. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Brandon drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over Jaylen's attire, lingering on his worn shoes. A flicker of something Jaylen couldn't quite decipher. Envy? Disgust? Crossed his face before settling back into a mask of amusement. Jaylen's stomach clenched. He'd hoped to remain invisible, a shadow flitting through the edges of this glittering world. But here he was, center stage in his own private nightmare. Just breathe, Jaylen, he told himself. Just play your piece and get out of here. Isn't this a little above your pay grade, Brooks? Colton Bishop, Brandon's shadow, chimed in, a smirk twisting his lips. He adjusted his expensive-looking watch, the gesture radiating an almost practiced nonchalance. Jaylen's fingers tightened around his music folder, the paper crinkling under the pressure. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the polished floor. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, stealing his breath. He'd known this was a mistake. Why did I even come here? He tried to ignore them, to focus on the music swirling in his head, a refuge from the stinging barbs of their words. He reached out, almost hesitantly, towards the Steinway. The polished wood felt cool and smooth beneath his fingertips. For a brief moment, the world outside faded away, replaced by the anticipation of sound, the promise of music. Brandon's laugh, harsh and grating, shattered the illusion. You can't just touch that, he sneered, stepping closer. His voice dropped to a stage whisper, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. That's a Steinway. Costs more than your whole house. The laughter that erupted around them was like a physical blow. Jaylen recoiled, his hand dropping away from the piano as if burned. The heat of humiliation flushed his cheeks, a stark contrast to the icy fear gripping his heart. Brandon's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. He knew with a sickening certainty that Brandon was right. This single instrument, this symbol of wealth and privilege, probably did cost more than everything he owned, everything his family had ever worked for. The realization was a gut punch, leaving him breathless and exposed. His mind raced, a chaotic jumble of emotions. Shame battled with a fierce, unexpected surge of anger. He wanted to lash out, to defend himself, to scream at them that his worth wasn't measured in dollars and cents. But the words wouldn't come. He was trapped, pinned beneath the weight of their disdain, their casual cruelty. "They don't even see you," a voice whispered in his head. "They see a caricature, a symbol of everything they despise." He closed his eyes, trying to block out the laughter, the sneers, the suffocating feeling of inadequacy. He focused on the music, the melody that had always been his solace, his escape. He could feel the notes vibrating within him, a powerful current of emotion waiting to be unleashed. "This is why you're here, Jaylen," he told himself, "not for them, but for you, for the music." A quiet defiance began to bloom within him, a tiny spark of resistance against the crushing weight of their judgment. He opened his eyes, his gaze settling on the Steinway. It wasn't just a piano anymore. It was a weapon, a shield, a voice, and he was ready to use it. The polished wood of the grand piano gleamed under the gymnasium's bright lights, a stark contrast to the worn keys of the battered upright in Jaylen's cramped living room. He swallowed, the lump in his throat thick and unyielding. The echoes of laughter, sharp and pointed, still pricked at his ears. Brandon Fielding's sneering face, Colton Bishop's amused smirk, they were etched onto the back of his eyelids. He could feel the weight of their privileged gazes, heavy on his threadbare jacket. "They think I don't belong here," he thought, the words a bitter taste in his mouth. "They think my music won't reach them." He closed his eyes, momentarily shutting out the opulent surroundings, the sea of expectant faces. He breathed in, the faint scent of floor polish mingling with the lingering aroma of catered food, and exhaled slowly, pushing away the fear that threatened to consume him. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. He wasn't just playing for them. He was playing for himself. For the countless hours spent hunched over his old piano, for the melodies that bloomed in the silence of his small room, for the dream that whispered in his heart. He had to believe, just for this moment, that his music could transcend the chasm that separated their worlds. He placed his fingers on the keys, the cool ivory a stark contrast to the burning anxiety that coursed through his veins. The first notes, hesitant and uncertain, drifted into the expectant silence. Too soft, he thought, the self-criticism a familiar voice in his head. "They'll think I'm afraid." He pressed on, the melody unfolding like a fragile flower, each note a petal tentatively unfurling. He could still feel their eyes on him, dissecting, judging. He imagined Brandon whispering another cruel jibe, Colton stifling a laugh. The imagined mockery fueled a flicker of defiance within him. He poured his doubt, his anger, his yearning into the music. The melody gained strength, becoming more assertive, more resonant. His fingers danced across the keys, now sure and confident. The initial hesitation vanished, replaced by a quiet certainty. He wasn't just playing notes. He was telling a story of resilience, of dreams stubbornly clinging to life in the face of adversity. The gymnasium, once a cavern of mocking laughter, was now hushed, the silence heavy with anticipation. He could feel the shift in the atmosphere, a palpable change in the air. The weight of their gazes felt different now, less judgmental, more curious. He closed his eyes again, losing himself in the music. The world outside faded away, replaced by the landscape of his own creation. He saw the dusty streets of his neighborhood, heard the distant rumble of the city, felt the warmth of his grandmother's hand on his shoulder. He poured all of it into the music, every heartbreak, every joy, every fleeting moment of beauty that had touched his life. The melody soared, filling the vast space with its raw emotion. It spoke of longing and hope, of pain and triumph, of a spirit that refused to be broken. He didn't see the surprise flicker across Brandon's face, the amusement fade from Colton's eyes. He didn't notice Mrs. Parker's proud smile or Mrs. Greer's thoughtful expression. He was lost in his own world, a world woven from sound and emotion, a world where the only language spoken was the language of music. The final notes hung in the air, shimmering, then slowly fading into silence. The silence stretched, thick and profound, broken only by the soft intake of breath. Then a single pair of hands began to clap, hesitant at first, then gaining momentum. Another joined in, then another, and another, until the gymnasium erupted in thunderous applause. The sound washed over him, a wave of acceptance, of appreciation, of something akin to respect. He opened his eyes, blinking in the sudden brightness of the lights. The sea of faces that had once seemed hostile now looked different. There was awe in their eyes, a flicker of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the power of his music. Brandon's face was pale, his usual arrogance replaced by a look of shame, regret. Colton's expression was unreadable, a mixture of surprise and something that might have been admiration. He looked at Mrs. Parker, her face beaming with pride, her eyes shining with unshed tears. And then he saw Mrs. Greer, her gaze steady and thoughtful, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. The applause continued, echoing in the vast space. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of quiet triumph that had nothing to do with winning or losing, and everything to do with finding his voice, with sharing his truth. He had touched them, reached them, bridged the chasm that had seemed so wide, so insurmountable. He had spoken to them in a language they hadn't understood before, the language of his heart, the language of his music. He had shown them that even a boy from the wrong side of the tracks, with worn shoes and a threadbare jacket, could create something beautiful, something powerful, something that could move them, change them, connect them. In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of applause, he felt a sense of belonging he had never known before. The fear, the doubt, the insecurity, they hadn't vanished entirely, but they were muted now, overshadowed by the quiet confidence that bloomed within him. He had found his place, not in their world, but in the world he had created with his music, a world where everyone was welcome, a world where everyone belonged. The last note hung in the air, a fragile echo in the sudden hush. Jaylen's fingers rested on the ivory keys, trembling slightly. The silence was so profound it pressed against his eardrums. He could hear the frantic thump of his own heart, a trapped bird against his ribs. Then a single, hesitant clap broke the spell. Another followed, then another, until the gymnasium erupted in applause. Jaylen's stomach lurched, a mixture of relief and disbelief. He hadn't dared to look up during his performance, his gaze fixed on the intricate dance of his fingers across the keys. Now he slowly lifted his head, the bright lights momentarily blinding. The faces in the audience swam before him, a blur of smiles and astonishment. They liked it. The thought felt foreign, almost unbelievable. He had expected ridicule, the same sneering contempt he'd received from Brandon and his friends just moments before. Instead, a warm wave of acceptance washed over him. It can't be real. It can't. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. A hand touched his shoulder, gentle but firm. Jaylen, Mrs. Parker's voice, thick with emotion, cut through the clamor. You are magnificent. Her eyes, usually sharp and critical, were soft with pride. He could see the shimmer of unshed tears in their corners. She's proud of me? The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was a feeling he'd rarely experienced, a stark contrast to the constant self-doubt that gnawed at him. The applause subsided, replaced by a low hum of conversation. People began to approach the stage, their voices a blend of congratulations and inquiries. Jaylen felt a hand clasp his, shaking it firmly. Young man, a deep voice boomed. It was Mr. Henderson, the school's renowned music patron, a man whose name Jaylen had only read in newspaper articles. You just gave one of the finest performances I have ever witnessed. Mr. Henderson's words rang in his ears, each syllable of validation he'd never dared to dream of. "He heard me." Jaylen struggled to find words, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "Thank you, sir. It's an honor." The words felt inadequate, hollow against the enormity of the moment. He saw Mrs. Greer, the principal, making her way towards him, her expression a mixture of awe and something akin to respect. The thought was almost dizzying. Respect. From the principal of Riverstone Academy, a woman who seemed to embody the very essence of privilege and power. "Jaylen," she said, her voice surprisingly warm. "That was truly extraordinary. You have real talent, a raw, untamed power that is simply mesmerizing." He could only stare, his mind struggling to process her words. "We need to make sure you're given opportunities," she continued, her gaze intense. "The kind you deserve." Opportunities. The word echoed in Jaylen's mind. Opportunities he'd never even considered, possibilities that seemed as distant as the stars. A scholarship? Lessons with a renowned maestro? He felt a tremor of excitement, a fragile hope taking root in the barren landscape of his dreams. He glanced towards the back of the gymnasium, searching for a familiar face. Brandon stood near the exit, his usual swagger replaced by a strange stillness. His eyes, usually filled with arrogance, were downcast. He looked smaller, somehow, stripped of his usual bravado. Colton, beside him, whispered something in his ear, but Brandon didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped, disappearing into the crowd. Jaylen watched him go, a strange mix of emotions swirling within him. There was a flicker of triumph, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he'd proven them wrong, that his music had spoken louder than their mockery. But there was also a hint of pity, a faint understanding of the insecurity that lay beneath Brandon's bluster. He had seen that same insecurity in his own reflection, the same fear of not measuring up. "He's just scared." The realization struck him with surprising clarity. Scared of being overshadowed, of losing his perceived status. Jaylen had been scared too, terrified of exposing his vulnerability, of having his dreams crushed beneath the weight of their disdain. But in that moment, surrounded by the lingering echoes of his music, he realized something profound. He had faced his fear, and in doing so, he had found his voice. The crowd began to disperse, the gymnasium slowly emptying. Jaylen remained on stage, his fingers still hovering over the keys. He could still feel the vibrations of the music, the phantom touch of the notes on his fingertips. He closed his eyes, letting the silence wash over him. It was a different kind of silence now, no longer heavy with anticipation, but filled with the quiet hum of accomplishment. He had played for them, for himself, for the music that lived within him. And in that act of creation, he had found a sense of belonging he had never known before. The world seemed different now, brighter, full of possibilities. The future, once a hazy blur of uncertainty, now held a glimmer of hope, a melody waiting to be written. He took a deep breath, the scent of polished wood and lingering perfume filling his lungs. The grand piano, no longer a symbol of unattainable dreams, felt like an extension of himself, a vessel through which he could pour out his soul. He pressed a single key, a clear, resonant note that echoed through the empty gymnasium. A new beginning. The cool night air kissed Jaylen's face as he stepped out of Riverstone Academy, the grand doors clicking shut behind him, the sound echoing the finality of the evening. He clutched his worn music bag, its faded canvas a stark contrast to the polished marble he'd just left behind. The parking lot shimmered under the high-intensity lamps, the expensive cars gleaming like trophies. He felt a tremor of the unease that had plagued him all evening, a dissonance between his world and this one. "They're just cars," he told himself, "pieces of metal. They don't hold music." But the thought felt hollow, a weak defense against the imposing reality of wealth and privilege. Mrs. Parker followed him out, her brisk steps a familiar rhythm against the quiet hum of the night. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm and reassuring. "You were magnificent, Jaylen," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He looked up at her, her eyes shining with pride, and a small, hesitant smile touched his lips. He could still feel the phantom vibrations of the keys beneath his fingertips, the reverberations of the music still echoing in his soul. The applause, initially hesitant, then growing into a thunderous ovation, replayed in his memory. They heard me, he thought, a flicker of wonder igniting within him. They actually heard me. He looked away, towards the dark silhouette of the distant hills, a familiar comfort in their stoic presence. I just played, he murmured, the words barely audible. He hadn't sought their approval, hadn't craved their admiration. He had simply played, pouring his heart and soul into the music, letting it speak for him, a language far more eloquent than any words he could muster. "That's all you ever need to do," Mrs. Parker said, her voice soft, understanding the unspoken depths within him. "Stay humble, baby. Let your work speak louder than your words." Her words resonated with a truth he'd always instinctively known. Music was his sanctuary, his voice, his truth. It wasn't a tool for validation, but a means of expression, a bridge between his inner world and the world outside. He nodded, absorbing her words, letting them settle within him like a calming balm. He thought of Brandon Fielding, the boy's initial sneer and subsequent stunned silence. The memory brought a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. He'll never understand, Jaylen thought, the power of music, the power of creating something beautiful out of nothing. Brandon's world was built on tangible things, on possessions and status. Jaylen's world, however, was built on the intangible, on the ephemeral beauty of sound, on the raw emotion that transcended material wealth. The cool night air deepened, carrying the scent of pine from the nearby trees. He took a deep breath, letting the earthy fragrance fill his lungs, grounding him, reminding him of the simple, unadulterated beauty of the natural world. This was his refuge, the place where he could shed the weight of expectations, the burden of judgment. He looked back at the imposing facade of Riverstone Academy, its brightly lit windows casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. It was a world he'd glimpsed tonight, a world of privilege and opportunity. Mrs. Greer's offer echoed in his mind: scholarships, advanced classes, a chance to hone his talent in a way he'd only dreamt of. The prospect was both exhilarating and daunting. He felt a tremor of fear, a familiar whisper of self-doubt. Am I good enough? The voice inside him questioned. Do I belong here? He closed his eyes, taking another deep breath, letting the music wash over him again, the memory of the notes, the rhythm, the emotion. I do belong, he realized, a quiet confidence solidifying within him. My music belongs. It wasn't about the grand piano, the opulent surroundings, or the privileged audience. It was about the music itself, the pure, unadulterated expression of his soul. That was his power, his truth, and no amount of wealth or privilege could diminish that. He opened his eyes, the fear receding, replaced by a sense of quiet resolve. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He knew there would be more challenges, more doubts, more moments of insecurity. But he also knew that he had something special, something that transcended the material world, something that resonated with the deepest parts of the human spirit. And that, he realized, was a power that no one could take away from him. Mrs. Parker squeezed his shoulder again, a silent understanding passing between them. "Come on, Jaylen," she said, her voice gentle. "Let's get you home." He followed her to her car, the gravel crunching beneath their feet, the sound a grounding rhythm in the stillness of the night. As he settled into the passenger seat, he looked back at Riverstone Academy one last time. The lights seemed less intimidating now, less representative of a world he didn't belong to. He knew he still had a long way to go, a journey filled with uncertainties and challenges. But tonight, he had found his voice, not in words, but in the universal language of music. And that, he knew, was a voice that would continue to resonate, a voice that would refuse to be silenced. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the grandeur of Riverstone Academy behind, merging onto the quiet road that led back to his world. The world of worn-out pianos, of hand-me-down clothes, of dreams whispered in the quiet corners of a modest home. He leaned his head against the window, watching the streetlights blur past, the city lights twinkling in the distance. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of the road lull him into a state of peaceful contemplation. Tonight, he hadn't just played music. He had played a symphony of resilience, a melody of hope, a testament to the power of a spirit that refused to be confined by circumstance. And in the silence of his heart, he knew that the music had just begun. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his soul, that this was only the beginning of his song. A song that would echo far beyond the gilded halls of Riverstone. A song that would speak to the hearts of those who, like him, dared to dream beyond the confines of their circumstances. A song that whispered of the boundless potential that resided within every child, waiting for a chance, waiting for a voice. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the world, someone was listening,